So today, we're not going to talk about technology. We're not even going to talk about ways to manage technology. We're going to get there. But what we're going to talk about today is something that is critically important to achieving those technological outcomes, and that's people. And honestly, over the last 30 years, it's an area where I see that we've made some strides, but we could really be doing a whole lot better. So, of course, a little bit of housekeeping. Uh, Everything I say here are my own opinions and not a part of any other organization. And I guess the rest of this slide basically says, please don't sue me for anything I say today, which is important. But before we get to the meat of the matter, as any good presentation should, let's start with a little music. Okay, this is what I'm going to do here today. We're going to play two chords. Now, in music, a chord is a collection of three or more notes played at the same time. And what I'd like you to do is, when I play the first and then when I play the second, see if you can detect what's different about them. This is going to make sense in just a minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and play this first chord. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and place that into upper memory. Okay, so let's try to remember what that sounded like. Now let's play the second chord. Okay, did you hear the difference? Okay, the first chord is a C major chord, garden variety, no matter what kind of music you like. You find it everywhere. The next one is also a C major chord, but we made one small difference. We added a dissonant note to it. So, see, in music, dissonance is the opposite counterpart of harmony. It can go horribly wrong if you don't do it right, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you notice, we add a little bit of dissonance here and we create a little bit of character. We create a little bit of movement. You can almost picture, like in a soap opera, when somebody says something shocking, the main character's view, and then you hear that kind of chord. Little bit of dissonance. Let's keep that in the back of our mind as we move to the next case study. And I promise this is going to make sense in a minute. Some of you may have seen this graphic if you are on LinkedIn a lot. Back in World War II, the Army Air Corps was trying to figure out how to add armor to their aircraft in such a way to protect them. And what they did was they collected data on where the planes were coming back damaged. And they took the data and they handed it off to a group called the Statistical Research Group, obviously, or as the name implies, populated by statisticians. And the question to them was, how much armor should I add to these places where we're seeing it get shot up to protect them more? So it lands on the desk of a man named Abraham Wald, obviously a statistician, somebody who enjoys math for a living. And he came up with something very counterintuitive. He said, don't add armor where you're seeing the damage. Add armor where you're not seeing the damage. So this would come to be known as survivorship bias. He's a statistician. He's also concerned with the population of the data from which the analysis is being made. And what he said was, where you're not seeing damage is where planes were getting hit and not making it back. So go back to dissonance. What would have happened if the Army Air Corps didn't add this additional viewpoint, this additional set of knowledge, skills, and ability, this little piece of dissonance? They would have solved precisely the wrong problem. Okay, let's move on to the next piece. Bring it back to people. People are everything in technology. They're the reason why we do what we do. In information technology, we're supporting human endeavors. No piece of technology is entirely without humans. Even satellites in space interact with humans and support a human endeavor at some form or fashion. And even as artificial intelligence takes more and more of a central place, people are not going to become irrelevant. They're going to become relevant in different ways. Think back to when factories first started being automated. People didn't go away; they just served different roles in those factories. Well, go back about the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Think about companies like what we used to call IBM Big Blue. And you had companies like Digital Equipment Corporation, and Honeywell was the second largest computer company at the time. People spent 10, 20, 30 years with a single company. And so a company could invest in developing their people for the future because eventually they would get a return on that investment. Well, think to today. How long does the normal person stay with a company? About 3 to 5 years. So now companies, when they provide training, it's on compliance, it's on filling out your time card. Um, the the onus on doing that long-term professional development has fallen on the individual, the person who needed it the most. So I'm going to propose to all of us here that what that means by de facto is that it's fallen on us, the profession. Okay. And we're the fallback to making sure that we have a path moving forward. But people are people are messy things. Okay, we have to deal with them. We have to develop them. We have to get them to work together to get the most out of these individuals. The This is not something necessarily that can be coded. There are going to be culture things that we have to take into account when we're able to integrate individuals to progress and to get them to work together, the technological outcomes are going to be better. But we're having certain issues right now. The first one being the Peter Principle. Back in about 1970, a man named Lawrence Peter writes a book about this thing called the Peter Principle, where the idea being that think about going from one rung of the ladder to the next in an organization. You're competent, you're competent, you're competent until one day you're no longer competent. Well, what happens? According to Peter, the people who basically promoted you or hired you, they turn their back, they put you on an island, they kick you upstairs, what he called percussive sublimation. We don't rally around that person who's having a challenge. And another issue is the fact that, let's face it, we specialize. We're in a career field which is massively wide. No one person can understand it all. So, governance, risk, and compliance inside of cyber will primarily focus on what's our status for control AU7, what's the status of our security authorization packet, the security operations center, indicators of compromise, IT ops, service level agreements, software development, the effectiveness of the CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration and continuous delivery. Well, there's a converse to that as well. General George Patton had a fantastic quote where he said, "If everybody's thinking alike, then somebody's not thinking." Well, this is the playground of threat actors in cybersecurity. We could capture 99% and agree on 99%. That 1% where we don't have that dissonant voice like Abraham Wald, the threat actor is going to find it. And that's exactly where they're going to hit us. And finally, there's this idea of, well, if we just get that one more tool, okay, everything's going to be great. Well, tools need to be architected. And architecture is not simply about how you actually turn the wrench to get it into the system, it's how it fits into the organization as far as people, process, and technology. Well, what if in cyber, what if among our folks we could increase agility and adaptiveness? Change cannot just be simply be something that we tolerate, but actually something that we can leverage and actually is potentially a good thing. What if we can actually get folks to interact better in a way that actually produces more than the amount of resources that we put in? What if, when we hire, we can have a better idea of, well, what kind of individual are we looking for? And what are the trade-offs between individuals? If you're hiring three to five different people for three to five different positions, maybe you can have a different set of attributes and KSAs to make a more harmonious yet dissonant team. What if we can reduce toxicity? One of the key inputs to toxicity is something called imposter syndrome. Somebody reaches a certain level and there's a nagging thing behind their head that said, "Hey, you don't deserve to be here. Somebody's going to find you out." And so somebody builds non-constructive behaviors around them that creates not only a non-productive environment, but a toxic environment. What does this create? Turbulence and turnover. Hey, layoffs are going to happen. The needs of the kind of skill sets may change the structure of the organization. But if we're losing people and we really couldn't afford to lose them, think about the quote from Sir Richard Branson: "Treat people or train people well enough so that they can leave, but treat them well enough so they don't want to." I said this wasn't about technology. I lied. Because at the end of the day, if we do all these things, we're going to get better technological outcomes. So here are the three core pillars to the cyber success factor. The first one is synergy. It's not coordination. It's not even collaboration. Synergy means that the different parts of the different individuals in the organization are working together in such a way that their output is greater than, perhaps even several times greater than the sum of their individual inputs. So instead of 5 people on the team, you're getting 10 units of output, 20, 30 units of output. That's synergy. Also, another thing that I stress throughout this model here is that leadership has to be pervasive from the individual all the way up into the C-suite. Um, Formal leaders, obviously, they have to have leadership quality, but informal leaders, the folks that actually affect and move your culture forward. Think about that principal engineer that's been in your organization for 30 years and everybody goes to for advice. And in fact, at the end of the day, you need to be able to lead yourself. And finally, the core mindset here is a risk-centered mindset. Cybersecurity is adversarial. And that's the one thing that makes it different from every other part of technology, of information technology, almost every other part of the company. There's a bad guy. It may be a human bad guy. It could be something as a forest fire, but there's something that wants to do you wrong. And we have to take the time to be able to think about how we're going to manage the risk of this thing wanting to do us wrong. This is going to support decision making, not only at the top, but in those little itty bitty decisions that are going to be made all throughout the day, perhaps by a junior security operations center analyst at 2 a.m. in the morning. Pause for dramatic effect. This is the core of the cyber success factor. It's three-dimensional, not only because the approach is three-dimensional, but because people are three-dimensional. And what we're going to do is we're going to take these three aspects here and we're going to create a vector. And that's why I chose the word vector, because a vector starts at a certain point and it's in perpetual motion in a particular area. We can change the direction of that. We can actually have multiple different outcomes that we want to achieve. But by starting with these three vectors, we create this motion for individuals. So just to go over a few of the key core points. So starting on this x-axis, the breadth axis, one of the things that I identified is so many of the things that we deal with have nothing to do with actual technological skills. Um, so what I did was I looked at a number of different bodies of knowledge: the Army Leader Requirements Model, Daniel Goleman's work with emotional intelligence, Covey's principle-centered leadership, even Confucianism. And what I did was I affinity grouped these different bodies of knowledge and came up with 30 attributes. Please, for the love of all things good, don't try to use all 30. Okay. It's a menu, it's a starter set. But it's a foundation. And we'll get into the foundational aspect here in the next slide. The next thing is we're going to reuse what's already out there. NIST has done a fantastic job with the NICE workforce framework. The Department of Defense has extended that out in the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework. We're going to reuse those items. Next, we're going to target the Peter principle. We're going to take into account as people move up in terms of scope of responsibility, things are going to change. And lastly, we're going to talk about an educational framework called Bloom's taxonomy to talk about for a particular attribute at a particular level. Where would we like that individual? Where are they, so that we can build a plan to get them there? So let's start with that x-axis. Let's go ahead and rotate that 90 degrees. Now we're here at the breadth axis. So we start with that basic professional level. And when I say foundational, this means that everything above that builds on everything below that. It creates a foundation. The attributes and the knowledge, skills, and abilities above it will leverage the things below it, but it also allows us to group certain things together, so that if out of 30 attributes, and this is totally customizable, pick a few of your own. If we can communicate that across the organization, now we can have a common understanding of what are the professional things about an organization that we want everybody to have, maybe just in different degrees. So remember we talked about how the fact that people were almost over specialized. We had those silos of excellence, or sometimes I call them localized pockets of brilliance. Well, what if we could create a common language across the organization? What if everybody had a basic understanding of, say, network protocols, but this one here is an expert in it, and this one here basically understands how it works? Well, now the next thing is to hit that adversarial nature of the organization. Now we go and we identify those core adversarial risk-based items that are going to be common across not only the cyber organization, but the IT organization, to help people start to think about counteracting that adversarial nature. Now, these bottom three rungs, for the most part, you're going to do that across the organization. So that way you're not creating kind of a new profile for every single individual. It's going to save you time, and it's also going to create consistency across the organization. And only then will we need to get into the specific work role. What if it's somebody on the Security Operations Center? What if it's a program management specialist? In fact, inside the NICE framework, they also talk about legal advice, folks that specialize in providing legal advice to cyber. Now, after we've created this foundation, now we're left with those eaches, those remainders that we can focus on, that are going to be different from work role to work role. And next is the fact that sometimes we have people do other things as well. When I was with a company called LearnerLine Incorporated, small company, but it did everything. It did FedRAMP, it did consulting. We had pen testers, managed security operations center. Well, we also had a school of cybersecurity, and our CEO, brilliant move. He said, "Hey, the folks who have a kind of a proclivity for teaching, why don't we also have them teach classes in the things that they do every single day? So we'll just shave off a little bit of time." This would be an alternate specialty. So we can take somebody who works on FedRAMP, but then we can slice off a little bit of time and maybe teach them, okay, this is how to build a class or how to deliver a class. And now we can also use this to kind of think ahead to where the individual might be later on. So somebody might be in security engineering today, They may want to be a program manager or project manager down the road. We can start looking ahead to that. That vector doesn't have to be one thin line. It could be one of those really fat arrows or even an arrow with multiple endpoints. So again, we're going to go and target the Peter principle. As we move, and now I've looked at 1,000 different words for this. I settled on scope. It's the least bad of all bad possible ways to describe this. But basically, what we're talking about is where are you in terms of the that vertical part of the organization. Even if you're an individual contributor, your scope is going to have you have a different way of looking at things. A really excellent book that parallels this is Essence of Decision, Explaining the Cuban Missile Crisis by Graham Ellis and Philip Zelikow. Yes, it's about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it's more so about why did people make the decisions that they made in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And a lot of it's because they had a different mental model depending upon where they were in the organization. So why, when we have a awesome dynamic individual contributor, when we make them a supervisor, why do we expect them to now be fantastic as a supervisor or as a middle manager becoming an executive? Why do we expect they're going to be just as fantastic at the next level when when their entire context has changed? And so finally, we get to the depth axis, this Bloom's taxonomy. I looked at a number of different ways to try to describe this. I looked at basic, intermediate, expert. I looked at apprentice, journeyman, master. One of the big problems that I had with it was not only was it not granular enough, but if you ask 5 different people what intermediate means, 5 different people are going to have vastly different ideas. Bloom's taxonomy is already used out in the education community. So I said, why not use this? Why couldn't we also use this to describe where we want to be, somebody to be inside of an organization? So let's go ahead and apply this. We have Mabel Snickerdoodle, who is the Director of Security Operations. So we're going to take that x-axis here, and we're going to break down where we want Mabel to be. Now, the first 3 items, as we say, are foundational. We want everybody to have self-regulation and professional bearing. We want everybody to have some degree of knowledge about acquisition and procurement requirements, maybe just to different degrees, but we haven't hit that point yet. Obviously, we want everybody to understand risk management, but specifically for Mabel, we want her to understand knowledge of network traffic analysis. That's going to be something very specific to Mabel. And then just like we talked about with the learner line example, maybe we want her to be able to teach classes, so we're going to throw this in here. Well, one of the drawbacks to the frameworks that are out here is it provides you a series of KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities, but it really doesn't talk about to what degree. Okay, it's almost kind of pass and fail. So now we take Bloom's taxonomy, and so for Mabel, we say, well, we want you to be at the second highest level, evaluate, which means that you can actually make decisions based upon different considerations regarding maybe stressful situations. Maybe we want her higher. Maybe we want her to be lower. It's going to be different depending upon the organization. Maybe for acquisition, we just want her to know what she needs, but she doesn't really need to know the process. Maybe we do. It all depends upon the organization. So we can create a target. In this case, we're going to say understand, but you don't necessarily need to be at the apply level, but a different organization may think differently. We want you to be able to do risk management, Mabel, but you don't necessarily need to be like the risk executive function inside of an organization. You just need to be able to take a procedure and do it. Now, for somebody who's directing security operations, we want her pretty high up there. So maybe we're going to say analyze. Okay, somebody who can kind of compare and identify and find value. But we're going to have principals there who are the Jedis underneath her. So maybe we don't need her quite up that high because we can't have everybody perfect in everything. There's going to be things that we need her to be higher up on the competency level, the mastery level. So maybe this is a good happy medium for Mabel in her position. And then finally, if we give her a procedure, a template, maybe she can follow it. Maybe that's all we need for Mabel. This is a target. Then we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at Mabel and say, okay, this is where we think you are, not because we want to beat Mabel up, but because we want to build a plan to get her to where she needs to be. And if there are areas where Mabel is exceeding or anybody in the organization is exceeding, well, that's a fantastic opportunity because now we can take Mabel and maybe help her mentor or augment other people in their development. That's that synergy thing coming back again. Now, we created the direction. Now, how do we create that perpetual motion in that direction? Well, we want a spiral, okay? We want a cycle that's kind of spiraling the individual in that particular direction. So I look at a number of different schools of thought on this, and I condensed them down to three things: plan, grow, and reflect. Yes, it's a cycle, but it's more of a value chain. You're going to be doing all of these all of the time, but they kind of feed into each other. We want to create structure, like we just talked about, with that profile and that target profile and where you are, but also break that down into how we're going to get you from here to there. And when I say get, the employee from here to there, the employee's a partner in this. So that's also an important part of this as well. This is going to be a cyclical conversation between the individual and the organization. And we want to break this down into an achievable way to get there. We want to actually do it. We want to grow. Maybe it's through education. Maybe it's through on the job. Maybe it's through that augmentation that we're talking about. But finally, we have to carve out time to reflect. This is a part that, in my experience, we so much schedule out of our time. We don't allow individuals to just stop and to let all of that coalesce. Let the sequential part of the mind take a breath and let all those parallel parts of the mind start to talk and start to problem solve. So at this point, if I haven't gotten anything across here today, it's the whole importance of people. If we're able to create those kinds of communities, those kinds of groups, those kinds of organizations where people are maximizing their interaction. Now, one of the things I want to also clarify too is the whole group doesn't even have to like each other. I spent 20 years in the Army, and I guarantee you, I've been in plenty of organizations where many people didn't like each other, but yet they were still successful. We want everybody to be happy. That's fantastic. We would love everybody to whistle while they work. But at the end of the day, we want the work to enrich their lives and for them to enrich their work. And at the end of the day, this is going to create that those improved technological outcomes that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So, how to get involved. This is my ask. This was not free. No, I'm just kidding. So the first thing is there's a book. So I took all of this and I put it in the book. It's and so there's a QR code to the page on Amazon that'll take you there, and it's far more fleshed out inside of the book to include all 30 professional attributes. There is also a newsletter on LinkedIn that contains a lot of these different components, also smaller. But also, as I'm going and as I'm learning more in the process of furthering this, this is where I'm publishing it. And this is where I'm asking your help to send information back my way. It's a great place to go. Comment, direct message me. Everything except for throwing a note tied to a brick through my window, because that's against HOA rules. This is a great place to help me to further this and also put that back out into the community. And if you happen to be in Hawaii at the end of October, I will be also briefing at FCA TechNet Indo-Pacific. And there are going to be other, and there are also going to be other opportunities that I'll be putting out as well, and I'll be publishing that on my on my newsletter as well. Now, one caveat: I am a cyber professional. There are QR codes on this slide. Do not scan any QR codes unless you are sure that the person who's giving them to you is trustworthy and that they protected that QR code from malicious logic injection. So I'm going to leave you with a paradox. And so with all that, I'll go ahead and open this up to any kind of discussion.
So feel free to unmute or go ahead and put your questions in the chat. So Doug, I had a question. I mean, it's a lot of material to take in, but like, how do you, like, what do you do with something like phishing, right? Like, how does that cut across your vectors? You know, because it's probably what the most common attack vector.
So, so you know, the way I see this, you start from the wide, and then you go to specific. So with that, you know, there are a lot of KSAs. And so I found 16 knowledge, skills, and abilities inside of NICE that were common to every single work role. The best way I could say to do is to start from the general. And so that might be, for instance, knowledge of a threat actor attack patterns. I'm just throwing it off the top of my head. When you get that, now you can start to break that down into the eaches. So obviously phishing is a problem. That's going to be true for everybody. Obviously things like sanitizing code, and preventing different injection patterns is going to be important for our software developers. Once you go and you take that knowledge, skill, and ability, now you can break it down into the eaches. And even before you get there, we go back to Bloom's taxonomy. How much does that person need to know? Well, for your risk executive function, they need to know a lot. They need to be probably up at level 5 or 6 of Bloom's taxonomy. Your average user, they probably need to be at 2 or 3. And now we can take that and we can apply and say, well, or decompose it and say, well, what does apply mean for this particular knowledge, skill, and ability? You're an average user, don't click a link. So that way we have a starting point, and now we can kind of decompose that into, you know, what does it need to be? Now, a key warning I have to give, and that is, you can go crazy. For any of us here who've ever used any kind of framework, you can go crazy on a framework. I have had my mad scientist moments with this framework, and I have to remind myself to step back, take a breath, and say, uh, for those of you who worked with me at SCI, you probably heard me say, Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon. You may have heard me say this has to live in the real world.
Yeah.
When it came to what, yeah, when it comes to frameworks, at the end of the day, this has to live in the real world. This can be as academically elegant as anything under the sun, but if it doesn't solve a human problem, uh, it's not going to help.
So Doug, in the chat, well, someone wanted to know the study about the aircraft armor. If you could, put cite the reference there. But I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
Um, I love that it's all about people. I love what you just said. How was your experiences like in intelligence and in, all these different domains that you worked in? What are some of the people things that you ran into that gave you those aha moments to develop something like this?
The so let's start with the intelligence community without getting specific. Um, specific in terms of if any of my colleagues are on the phone, I don't want you to think I'm diming you out, but every single organization I go into has a humongously different way of looking at the world. So here's my constructive critique of the intelligence community, and it was very similar to my constructive critique of the communications community in the Army, and that is their time frame, their time horizon is about a week in the future and a week in the past.
Mm,
So if you start, I have a whole section in my book on maturity, uh, and there's a lot of so with those two particular groups, their culture is such where that underlying structure, you have to kind of remind them it's there. But now I also worked in the Army Human Resources community who are on the exact opposite side because they deal with things that have time horizons of 20 or 30 years.
mm.
And everybody must be symbiotic. Everything must go through a particular, through a particular procedure to the point where it just grinds to a halt. And what I found was, well, maybe there's a way to come back to brass tacks.
Mm.
I've throughout my career, I've always found it helpful to come back to center and then move off in your direction because we can get so tied up in the culture of that organization that we lose objectivity about it. And that's one of the things that I love about frameworks. You use the framework, you don't let the framework use you.
Right. I've got his book. I really recommend everybody get it and comment on it. I love your subtitles in this chapter. Good morning, Baghdad, making maturity cool again.
I'm trying. It's a fight though, because I am selling vegetables over cheesecake.
Steve, do we have other questions or do you have questions?
Well, one thing that I was wondering about, if I could maybe, yep, unmute, I'm unmuted. Just generally where this idea of the framework came from. You mentioned that many elements of your framework are based on other frameworks, other taxonomies, even from completely, different industries. So uh, I'm kind of interested in what coalesced in your mind to create this cyber success vector idea.
So I have a strange answer to that, and that is addiction, but not the addiction that you're thinking. Uh, Throughout my time, even before I came into the military, I got the opportunity to work on newspapers when I was a co-op student at Northeastern. But throughout my time in the military, you hit these pockets where you're in these high performing teams and everybody is working at at full capacity and everybody's keying off of each other and it is addictive. And it's really just like addiction where you're constantly chasing that previous high. How do I get back there? And so over the course of time, every place has its good points and bad points, but when you're in places where you see people and you say, gosh, things could be so much better. This individual could be so much better. This group could be so much better. And you're chasing that high performing high. Um, it occurred to me Well, why don't, well, I mean, if you know so much there, Mr. Smarty Pants, why don't you put it into something that maybe people can follow? And that's really what I came up with, is this was me putting if not my money where my mouth is, certainly my time.
I think there was a question from Kay that if you'd like to unmute or put it in the chat, one or the other.
Sure, I just unmuted because there's a bit of a lead up to it. So I've just moved to Maine and I live in a very rural part of Maine now. And more than one time when I'm talking to people who've lived here for a long time, what I hear is, I may not like you, but I'm going to pull you out of the ditch when you fall in the, if you drive off into the ditch, I'm going to help you and you're going to help me, right? And I just think, as I've been listening, I can't wait to read the book. It feels like what you've done here so beautifully, Doug, is you've like created a framework that a lot of different people can see through their own lenses at something that's really common to everyone. And to me, it feels like trust. There's an aspect of it that really feels like trust. And I just, maybe it's a bigger question than you would typically get, but I'm so curious. I've known you all my life, right? We've known each other for a long, long time. And
Yes,
I would just,
we're
I
not
was
going to
just,
apply a number to that.
no, we will not. Absolutely. It's been about 5 years, 5, 6, maybe. And I was just curious, like, how has this been something that's emerged over your life, over your work, over your life, or is it something more that you've just started reflecting on relatively recently,
Well, when you're an Army officer, every Army officer, it's almost like it's in your job description to pound your chest about leadership.
Mm.
And I've been through so many different, talks from senior officers about, what leadership should be. And you pick out little bits and pieces, of that. And you start doing the same thing yourself over the course of time. And so you spend all your time, and you get into like those high performing organizations. And there was one that I actually was the leader of back in Germany. And people still reach out to you and say thank you, and you try to get back to that, and you try to create a structure to say, well, how can we do that on a repetitive basis? How can it be simply more than me just pounding my chest going, we see them on LinkedIn, and it annoys me after a while. Here are the top 10 things to being a leader. Okay, great. It was that easy. Thank you. And I'm glad I saw this post and I only have to do these 10 things. And we know that especially with different situations, what worked the last time is not going to work the next time. You have to come back. You have to come back to to basics. And I said, okay, there are a lot of times where what I did the last time is not working this time. Okay, if I were to maybe create a way of engaging every particular situation over and over again, okay, how could I make that work for me, and could this work for the next guy or gal?
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions that you'd like to pose to Doug? You can either unmute or put it in chat. Doug, I guess just building on what you just said, it seems like a lot of the framework can be extended, well beyond cybersecurity. This idea of the 3 axes of breadth and depth and scope, and the gradations along each of those axes is a very powerful idea. What do you see as the other applications outside of cybersecurity for this framework?
So honestly, that's kind of like phase like whatever I can see plus one. So as I was developing this, there was a gentleman I respect highly. He's a behavioral anthropologist that I work with at the Senate. And I was picking his brain. I said, hey, I think this could be used anywhere. Should I make this just generic? And he said, no, you're a cyber guy. Talk about what you're passionate about. And that specificity will come through. And later on down the road, you can extend that out into other areas. And the fact of the matter is, those levels, that I showed in the book, I also mapped them out to military ranks and government, government pay grades. Bloom's taxonomy is obviously applicable everywhere, and scope, those scope levels, once you get above core attributes, it's whatever it is that you do. So if you're in finance, maybe that's core finance, and maybe the next level is, something specific like, core accounting. So you could basically take all of those, you could basically take that same thing and then break it down according to whatever it is that you want to break down. I just happen to start with cyber because, well, I'm a cyber guy.